I was fascinated about the fact that you could actually kind of take a movie theater, and rent it like for a day or so and run a movie. That in probably in 10th grade. I don't even know, how somebody would allow me to do it because as a 16-year-old, I could not officially even sign contracts.
So you rented a movie theater?
Movie theater for a day,
okay,
and ran like a movie called Do Anjane, which is actually an Amitabh Bachchan's movie.
Okay.
So but then we kind of figured, that was a bad idea because Pfizer probably in 2001 or so, they had actually 2002, they had offered me a full-time job.
Okay.
To work as a director there. It's a pretty good job, full-time job. But the biggest thing basically was, if I had taken that job, then my green card situation would be not an issue at all because they would actually kind of sponsor and do through the whole thing. But I always wanted to be an entrepreneur. So when when I was offered, I thought about it and I said no, I want to be an entrepreneur. No, I don't want to kind of take that.
Okay, so you refused a job from one of the world's biggest pharmaceutical companies.
The client wanted to kind of visit our office. So now we wanted to obviously didn't want to kind of show them a 1,000 square feet office space. We wanted to kind of show a much bigger space. So we rented a 5,000 square feet office space in MG Road.
Okay.
Which is a Raheja Towers, which is back then was the preeminent building, one of the big buildings in Bangalore. People knew about it. So we rented I believe about a 5,000 square feet office space, and the clients were going to kind of come to the office, and so we wanted to obviously create an impression. So we hired a bunch of people like interns and all that, and these people did really, really well. They're still working with us today.
Okay.
In 2005, I was comfortable that this is going to kind of take on. And then back then in America, we actually had what is called as, we had a housing boom back then.
Okay.
So now I had bought a house in 2002. I had bought a house. And so what I did was, the houses had risen up in value significantly. So I used what is called as like a HELOC loan, home equity line of credit loan.
Got it.
Took a loan on the house. I got another $200,000, so a lot of cash back then, and wanted to kind of expand even faster. So that is something that I would kind of caution people, right? Because you want to.
So basically, you put everything on the line. You put your house on the line.
Right,
so that is the degree of risk taking which you are comfortable with. Most entrepreneurs are comfortable with. What lessons from running a marathon are applicable in business?
On in terms of how does it relate to business? So obviously one is the endurance, for you to take on something long term. Because for marathon, I think if you want to start running a marathon, it will almost take you a year or 2 years to really kind of get to a marathon level.
Correct.
So business is like that. It's just long-term planning, resilience, which is failures. My father passed away, and I borrowed the insurance money from my mother. And then what I did was I put stock market. I went to America. I barely had any money. Eventually I kind of got a scholarship there. But the first year, I still remember, going from my college, from going and doing the groceries there in my bicycle in the winter, because I did not even actually own a car.
Okay.
So sometimes I reflect back on, hey, look, I did not have a car when I first kind of came in, and today here I am actually flying in my own jet, right?
Hi, welcome to another episode of Sellside Conversations. Our guest today is Shekhar Naik. Shekhar is a founder and CEO of mResult, a software and data analytics company based out of the US. Shekhar is also a marathoner, an aviator, and a philanthropist. In a conversation with Shekhar, we will talk about his journey of building mResult, his belief systems, his management style, his advice to young professionals and entrepreneurs, and much more. So Shekhar, welcome to Sellside Conversations.
I'm glad to be here and honored to be part of your Sellside podcast.
Thank you. So Shekhar, let's start off. Before the podcast, we had some conversations, and then realized you're quite an entrepreneur over here. So we'll start off with your childhood, because I believe the roots of entrepreneurialism and risk taking are laid very, very much in the beginning. So why don't you talk about some of your incidents in childhood that sort of motivated you, encouraged you towards this path?
You're absolutely right. I think sometimes people kind of become, they call them accidental entrepreneurs. But nevertheless, I think the plantings of that, I think, are very early on in the childhood, or maybe perhaps in the teenage years or so. So kind of going back to in my childhood, I mean, there were many number of different instances that I actually now recognize as something very entrepreneurial. So one example I think kind of goes back to long time back, probably right around the time when India actually won the first World Cup. Kapil Dev was the champion. was actually the captain basically.
1983.
1983. And so right around that time, right after that, cricket became like really big in India at the time. And in 1984, there was actually a series basically between India and West Indies. So West Indies kind of came to tour India. So Thumbs Up, which is the soft drink maker Parle back then, they wanted to really leverage this event and want to kind of promote. And a part of the promotion, what they did was it was a brilliant idea. So you had to open up I guess like the Thumbs Up drink, and inside that in the cap you actually had a cricket player basically. Yes. So you had either a series of cricket players, different players. So what you would do is you would kind of consolidate them together and
then take it to the shopkeeper and in exchange for some goodies in return, right? As kids, we all did that.
Right. You would take it to the shop and then they would kind of give you a bottle, and then you kind of get like 6 bottles. You'd get like a ball, handwritten by Kapil Dev.
Correct.
Or you'd actually kind of get a bat. We did 12 of those bottles signed by the whole West Indian team. So in my case, I mean, I was probably around 8th or 9th grade. I didn't have any money. But then, back then, my father used to work in Tirupati, part of like a textile town back then in Renigunta. So I would, would actually kind of go to these shops there, and I would actually kind of, buy the caps from them, almost like a wholesale price. Now if you look at it, right? And then I would actually kind of sell it to my classmates and the whole college or whole high school.
The early seeds of business.
I kind of go back and look at it now and say like, wow, that was a cool thing that I kind of did. I don't think anybody else was kind of doing that. Kind of going to the, shopkeepers there in the train station.
So you spotted an opportunity early on and you realized there's inefficiency in the market and you could make some money.
Right. Absolutely. Because I didn't have any capital. I did not have money to kind of buy the whole thing, because you had to kind of drink like so many to get the whole ball and a bat set. You had to probably drink around, I think maybe probably closer to like 300 bottles of Thumbs Up, which I think was not it was not in my in my capability. So it did that. So there were many instances like that. I also remember one time I was fascinated about the fact that you could actually kind of take a movie theater and rent it like for a day or so and run a movie. And so I did that in probably in 10th grade. I don't even know how somebody would allow me to do it, because as a 16-year-old I could not officially even sign contracts.
Okay.
Back then, right?
So you rented a movie theater?
Movie theater for a day.
Okay.
And ran like a movie called Do Anjane, which is actually an Amitabh Bachchan's movie.
Okay.
So but then we kind of figured, that was a bad idea, because that was not necessarily like the most popular movie perhaps. But I mean, nevertheless, it was an experience. As an entrepreneur, there's never a bad experience.
Exactly.
It's always a learning experience.
So you've always been dabbling into multiple things. You've trying to figure out where the opportunity is.
Correct. Yes. As a kid too. I think at the bottom line, I think at the core thing, being an entrepreneur, of course, entrepreneurs need to have a broad range of skills and aptitudes and knowledge. But the big thing is, I think they need to be comfortable with ambiguity. Being able to kind of take risk, because a lot of the things we kind of do around taking risk is how we kind of feel them.
Correct.
Some person might, climb, let's say they may kind of climb Mount Everest and actually kind of feel it's not they'll take it, it's a risk. Other people might kind of come back and look at it and say, oh my God, that's a tremendous risk I want to do. I don't want to do it.
Correct.
So I think entrepreneurs by nature have to, be comfortable with that ability to take on risk, something that is something uncomfortable.
Absolutely. So we'll talk about more on this as we go along.
Yeah.
Just sort of staying to the early days.
Sure.
What kind of student were you, Shekhar?
I think I was a very intelligent student, but I don't think I was a good student.
Okay.
Because the best students are the one who could actually kind of read and actually reproduce that. Right?
Correct.
Because you have to kind of reproduce what is actually in the book. I think I was always more inquisitive. So what happens when you're inquisitive, which is actually today it's considered as a good thing, being inquisitive, being open-minded. So back then I still remember, I think the teachers, when my dad went there when I was about 6th grade, when they went there, the teacher said, no, he's okay in math, he's okay in science, his general knowledge is very good, right? And then my dad came back home and my mom said, what does it mean? What profession will he take? If he's not great in math, then he cannot become an engineer,
Correct.
Right? Then my dad was, I think somebody were like jokingly remarking, oh, maybe he'll actually become an IAS officer.
Because that was big then.
Right, big then. So, so in some ways, I think I was not necessarily a great student, but very inquisitive for sure.
Okay, so that has helped you in good stead throughout your career.
I think
throughout your life, rather.
Right, absolutely. I think especially now in this.
So
day
the
and age.
value of inquisitiveness, curiosity is often underplayed, at least in the Indian society.
Right.
In the West, it's sort of encouraged, but in India, it's sort of downplayed.
Right. Because Indian society is more of a conformist society. Right?
Conformist society, absolutely.
You don't want to really ask too many questions because when you ask too many questions, then I still remember of course I grew up in though I grew up mostly in Andhra Pradesh. I'm originally from Mangalore. So, my mom would basically say, when I ask her too many questions, she's not happy.
Correct.
She'll be irritated, right? Correct, right? So, I think because it was difficult back then, and also the things were different back then. And now I think, without inquisitiveness, I don't think you can actually really build anything today. Because it's a changing world, and if you're not inquisitive, you're not going to be able to appreciate the changes that's going to happen.
Absolutely. You also mentioned that you did a small stint at the Mumbai Stock Exchange, or rather Bombay Stock Exchange as it was called then.
Right.
Just talk us through that experience.
Right. I think if I kind of go back and look at that story now, I'm in my early 50s now. When I kind of go back and look at that story now on what I did when I was about a 20-year-old kid. So, what happened, I think I kind of briefly mentioned to you. So, back then, we're talking about in the late 80s, 88, 80, 89, 90. Around that time, you had public issues that you can just dabble a little bit, kind of put in a couple of public issues. And then, unfortunately, my father passed away, suddenly he passed away, when I was about around 19-year-old. And I borrowed the insurance money from my mother.
Okay,
and then,
insurance money.
Insurance money.
Your dad's insurance money.
A little bit of it I borrowed from my mother.
Okay.
And then what I did was I put it in the stock markets.
Oh.
And
that is quite a gamble.
It was a gamble. It was a gamble, but I actually could see that things were kind of going in, and I also was studying. Not so much. I was studying the stock market fundamentals. I was doing my BBM back then in finance, my undergrad degree in business management in finance. So I knew how to read balance sheets and things like that. I also was a big fan of back then technical analysis.
Okay.
Because I knew how to
read the chart and
read the charts, and we didn't have Microsoft Excel. You actually had like Lotus 123. So do those things, plot trend lines using Fibonacci numbers and all of that. So Elliott wave theories and all of that. So I was a kind of geek when it kind of came to the stock market. So I kind of invested in stock markets. My portfolio went up by about 5 times whatever I invested, because not because of my brilliance, but because the market went up.
Sometimes there's a beginner's luck as well.
Beginner's luck, and as they say, actually, rising tide rises all boats.
All boats, absolutely.
Yeah? So the stock market actually kind of really went up, and this was the Harshad Mehta's time. So now I had heard. Now I was a kid from Mangalore. I was actually doing my undergrad here, and I had heard that about this jobbers in Bombay Stock Exchange, and I was like, okay, I want to kind of go to Bombay Stock Exchange and become a broker.
Okay.
Yeah? And I no connection whatsoever at all.
And jobbers, for the audiences, are people who basically, before the electronic stock exchange, these people who would do the buying and selling.
And you would have probably seen in old clips, using the hand signals and all of that. Right? And so I go there, and I still remember to this date, one of my friends here, he had told me that in Mangalore, he told me Uday Kotak was his first cousin.
Okay.
So what I do is I go there, but again, back then you didn't have phone numbers and all that stuff. So I go directly to Kotak Mahindra. And back then Uday Kotak, he had the Kotak Mahindra. I go there and, try to kind of meet up with him and, his general manager to convince him that I want to be a sub-broker there.
Okay.
So, certainly hustle, and eventually I started kind of working in, moved into stock markets, worked in stock markets, did some jobbing, as a 21, 22-year-old kid, I cannot imagine now, doing that. A lot of hustle back then. But then I think the other thing too is, the good thing when you're young is, you have lesser impact when you lose. Because you have a whole lifetime ahead of you.
Absolutely.
Right, to kind of fix things up, to learn from them.
Yeah.
So I think if you have any young audience, the people in their early 20s, my encouragement would be for them to try to do things that are completely random. There are high chances of failure. So
earlier in life.
Earlier in your life.
Correct.
Earlier in your life. So you experience it, you learn from it. Because I think, we spoke about it. Failures will always happen.
Absolutely, yeah.
So it's better to kind of have them early on, experience them, be resilient, kind of get up from them.
And sort of move on from there.
Move on from them.
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
Yeah.
So we were also talking about your stint from the Mumbai Stock Exchange to going to Dubai and the US.
Yes.
And then landing your first job
Yes.
at Pfizer. So can you just talk us through how did you had stints with IBM, Pfizer, and a couple of other companies.
Yes.
How did M-Result sort of come into being?
Yes. So, I mean, I think I guess like opportunities, a lot of them, they are like a knock on the door. They're like fortuitous. Opportunities are fortuitous. But then I think the key thing is to be ready and to recognize and to take a chance. So again, in my case, what happened, I was about 24 or so, I was in the stock markets. Back then my broking firm, MKM Financial Services, Mahesh K. Mehta, they wanted to be a member of National Stock Exchange. So just then National Stock Exchange started. So I was involved in it, in the application process and all of that. As a 23, 24-year-old kid, we became members. And then, I said, okay, I need to kind of try something else. I want to kind of go abroad. So back then, especially for someone from sort of like a Mangalorean background, because a lot of people from Mangalore or from this region, from around Mangalore, they had kind of gone to Dubai back then.
Okay.
So I wanted to, all right, let me kind of go to, because back then I think US was kind of much harder, or UK was much, much harder. So let me kind of go to Dubai. So I went to Dubai, and again I found myself, to work for UAE Exchange, and I eventually became a manager there. But I always wanted to do an MBA.
Okay.
And so I gave my GMAT, and I suppose in 1997 I moved to the US to do my MBA from University of Delaware.
Okay.
I did my MBA and pretty much finished it in about a year and a half, and I got a stint in IBM Global Services as a consultant. So I did that and came to Pfizer, which even today is one of the world's largest pharmaceutical companies. So came there for a 3-month stint. So the 3 months became 6 months, 9 months, a year, 2 years, but again, here is other.
So were you on a technical job, or were you just a business analyst?
I was more initially started off as a business analyst, but eventually I became a project manager.
Project manager, okay.
Right, from project manager, but then I think the key thing is basically, again, for folks here, it would be probably relationships. The power of relationships, especially in service industry. So if you're someone who's a brilliant technologist, maybe relationships are not necessarily like super important. But I think for the most of us, I think relationships are a no-brainer. I think it's very, very important to, take an effort to maintain, to build relationships, to manage relationships, which is also a big extent like give something to somebody, right? So I had built really good relationships. And then what happened was in 2004, now I did not even have my green card back then. It was in the process. I had an opportunity. I think one of my key team members back then, he was also a consultant. He wanted to move back to India.
Okay.
And so since I had some relationships, somebody suggested, why don't you go and talk to, the management and see, if you could set something up, and maybe perhaps you could actually kind of work for your company in India.
Okay.
So I said, all right, let me try that. I did that. They agreed, and fortunately I was able to start M-Result. That was the genesis. Started off as a one-person company.
So it was just an opportunity that sort of came out of nowhere.
Yeah, right. Doesn't hurt to ask.
Ah.
So I mean, a lot of people, I think what actually happens, I think they basically feel bad asking.
Correct.
What if the other person says no?
No.
Because people don't like rejection.
Absolutely.
By nature.
Nature.
There's nothing to lose.
Nothing to lose.
But I think like rejection is something, it just kind of hits them, right?
So people are very reluctant to even make a phone call and ask for very simple things.
Correct. Right? Because they feel, like if I ask somebody, then I will be below and he will be above.
Correct.
Or she will be above, whatever it is. Right? So, it's kind of it's your mindset.
Mindset.
Right? Nothing to lose by asking.
I think, So basically that's how
it started off there, and then I think that was I'm looking at it. But then that said, they were now sometimes when I reflect and say, hey, was it as simple as that? I think it was not as simple as it in some ways, because I did not have a green card back then, and Pfizer probably in 2001 or so, they had actually 2002, they had offered me a full-time job.
Okay.
To work as a director there. It's a pretty good job, full-time job. But the biggest thing basically was, if I had taken that job, then my green card situation would be not an issue at all, because they would actually kind of sponsor and do through the whole thing. So that would have been a huge relief for me. But I always wanted to be an entrepreneur. So when I was offered, I thought about it and I said, like, no, I want to be an entrepreneur. No, I don't want to kind of take that.
Okay, so you refused your job from one of the world's biggest pharmaceutical companies.
Correct.
And chose the path less taken.
Right? I don't know if it kind of played in my mind that way as clearly, but I think
instinctively you were sort of more aligned over here.
Correct. I was, though they, had it, I was like, no, this is kind of what I want to do. And, I'm so glad I did that. And, again, started off with Pfizer as the first client, and, obviously the kind of company kind of kept growing. And
But then at that point of time, Shekhar, there's obviously money issue. Like,
Yeah,
Pfizer
yeah.
will give you stability, a good job, a good salary, perks,
right,
as opposed to slugging it out
Right.
as an entrepreneur,
correct,
bootstrapping, I'm sure.
right, right,
Then the financial
Right.
benefit at that point of time
right.
hit you. How did you manage that decision?
Right. No, that's a very good question, right? I mean, I think that said, I had earlier, I think like back in about 99 or 2000, I don't remember now, probably I think late 99, maybe early 2000. So I had some, even I went there as a student, so there were some visa related issues. And here I was kind of stuck. I could not work. I could work only like 20 hours a week as a student, basically, right? And I had a really great job as a consultant, and I was extraordinarily like sad. And that's kind of when I ended up reading this book called Angel as Ashes. So this is a
Okay.
book written by Frank McCourt, who's a very well-known writer. He had just passed away. So the story about him, he was born in the US, but then actually he's Irish. So his family spends time in Ireland, and like how tough life was.
Okay.
And when I read that book, I realized, oh my God, like my life is not as bad compared to that.
Correct.
So everything is perspective, right?
So it's like a glass is half full, not half empty.
Right. So I think I had kind of developed this, it's easy to kind of say this stuff, but I think in some ways I had kind of developed this mindset basically around, work in a world around constraints. Where a lot of us, even including me, I used to say, wish I had only this, then I could do this stuff.
Correct.
Right? So maybe that would have been, wish only I had like financial stability.
Stability.
Then I could start my own company.
Correct.
Right? But these are constraints. And in the reality, the world is, right, if you want to do something substantial, you have to operate in a constrained environment. Right? Things will not be given to you with all the pieces together. You like some pieces, which was, I had I was very fortunate that I was in a very cool space. Business intelligence was taking off, analytics was taking off, and I was in that space. It was great that I was kind of working for one of the world's largest companies. It was great that even folks within the company, like senior people, they really liked me because I think they kind of saw a lot of passion and like a willingness to kind of put in the time. So reaffirmation, that's a big thing, right? Because confidence, other people, when they're kind of confident about you, it is a true blessing for you.
Absolutely.
I had those things. Sure, I did not necessarily have financial stability.
So in your mind, you were stacking up all the positives.
Yes.
You're not looking at the negatives or the challenges of
Right.
going entrepreneurial. You're saying these are the things in your favor, and
Right.
that is why you should pursue your dream.
So there is a saying, actually, absolutely, and there is a saying basically which says entrepreneurs to a degree are a little naive, right? Because what happens if you kind of stack up all the positives, and if you stack up all the negatives, I mean, again, there is like weightage too. How do you perceive that, right? And then, like if you do like an accounting equation, you'll be like, forget it, I'm not going to go to do this business, right? Because, it's like, okay, it's equal to this one.
Correct.
Right? So I think in some ways, I think this is true. Entrepreneurs have to, of course, they have to do the market research. They don't want to keep making the same mistakes. But there is also a degree of being a little naive. Little, not a lot. Right? If you are naive a lot, then, you're going to fail for sure.
Correct.
Little naive, and you have that leap of faith.
Leap of faith.
That things will kind of work out and make it work out. Plus, I also probably recognized at the time that, look, I kind of came to, America. I had a degree. I had some work experience. So probably I also felt, okay, if things kind of failed, I'm sure I'll probably kind of go back to being a consulting project manager. Right? It's not going to be the end of the world.
End of the world.
I'm not going to kind of go to the streets.
It's not a dead end.
Right.
It's not a dead end as the more paths will open up. Correct.
Precisely. Right? Yeah.
So Shikhar, now that you started M Result, okay, now, and the way you describe it, it's a small little setup, and you've got a back office in Bangalore.
Yes.
Just talk us through the initial challenges.
Yes.
And when was the first big opportunity that
Yes.
came, which turned out to be a pivotal moment in
Yes.
the history of M Result?
Yes. So I think, again, kind of going back to, this was early 2004, I still remember, back then, some of my key folks, especially Mati, who's my first employee, and today Mati's still there 20 years from now. He's one of our co-CEOs. We have two co-CEOs, and Mati is one of our co-CEO. So I still remember back then, 2004, we kind of got a really small office, like 400 people, 400 square feet office space.
Okay.
400 square feet,
That's large. For today's startup standards, 400 is large. Okay.
In Bombay, I think if you can look at Bombay, maybe 400 is not bad, from Bombay standards. But, from Bangalore, we had an office in Bangalore. And in a relatively small space. And I think I still remember this. I think we were trying to, interview a new recruiter basically. We probably had like two people maybe at the time, 2 or 3 people. So he kind of comes to this person kind of comes to our office, and he looks at this 2 or 3 people, and then he's like looking, where else? Is there anything else to kind of go into? No, that's it. That's pretty much the space that we had.
It starts
right
and
there.
ends.
Right there. Right, and so things like that, right? Because we didn't have a brand back then, and back then I think traditional companies actually people would value stability in traditional companies back then. There was another like really funny instance. Basically, what happened was, and back then we would Mati, especially like our key people, would work really late. So they would almost kind of try to kind of support clients in the US.
Okay.
Now things have changed in the past 10 years. So we would try to kind of back then even support basically clients up to like almost like 5 p.m. Eastern time.
Eastern time.
Which is probably about like 2 o'clock or 3 o'clock in the night, probably here, right?
Correct.
So back then, this is 2004, 5, around that time frame. And what had happened, I think, was that somehow a stray dog. In Bangalore, we have a lot of stray dogs in Bangalore.
Okay.
He kind of got into that office building.
Okay.
And now he could not kind of go out, and it was like barking the hell out of it, right? The whole building. It was barking really loudly. And then now, I guess we had a conference call we had with the client, and the client
barking
was
in the background.
Back in the background. So the client was saying, "Hey, are you working from home today? Do you have your dog barking?" Right? Today is like that would be what you kind of imagine.
Yeah.
Right? Somebody working from home, and you have the dog there in the background.
2006, it was unheard of somebody working from home.
Back then, right?
Back then,
and then obviously we said, yes, because we didn't want to describe to them the story about a stray dog actually,
sort of wandering into the office,
into the building, right? So things like that, and I think there is no sort of like a singular break per se.
But what point did you feel? Abhi ye chalega. Ye business abhi chalega. This is going to go
correct.
Northwards only.
Correct. I think I guess what happened was even right in the first year. So though we started off basically as a one-person company, by end of the year, I think we actually had nearly about 10 people. Things actually started kind of happening, and clients were seeing the value. And we had like one client back then. They were kind of seeing the value. Probably I would say maybe within 2005, literally like a year and a half. We saw that, and I was kind of gutsy back then. We had about 15, 20 employees, and we decided the client wanted to kind of visit our office. So now we wanted obviously didn't want to kind of show them a 1,000 square feet office space. We wanted to kind of show a much bigger space. So we rented a 5,000 square feet office space in MG Road.
Okay.
Which is a big thing, right? Because this is actually, it's called Raheja Towers, which is back then was a...
I know it's a near MG Road, correct. I've seen that building.
Back then it was a preeminent building, one of the big buildings in Bangalore. People knew about it. So we rented I believe about a 5,000 square feet office space, and we had about 8 or 10 people actually at the time working, probably about 8 to 10 people. So the clients were going to kind of come to the office, and so we wanted to obviously create an impression. So we hired a bunch of people like interns and all that, and these people did really, really well. They're still working with us today.
Okay. So these were makeshift employees or they were actual employees?
Actually, they're makeshift employees. We got them as makeshift employees.
Okay.
But then they became actual employees. Right?
Okay.
So, and then when the clients came in, because I think clients can really kind of see, do you say stuff or do you kind of mean it?
Yeah.
Right?
Do you walk the talk?
Do you walk the talk, or at least do you intend to walk the talk?
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
So I think that's kind of, I guess they probably have like an intuitive BS meter. Right? Intuitive, right?
Correct.
Right? If you say the sales guy.
Exactly. Right? The person who writes a check has the BS meter.
Correct.
Huh?
They have it, right? They have it, right? So I think what happened was they came in, they listened to our sort of like a vision basically. They kind of felt good about it, and started kind of getting more work. And then we kind of got, so the bigger risk I would say, so I kind of knew, I think that is a big risk, in some ways. And I want to probably caution some of your other, your sell-side podcast, I guess viewers who want to be entrepreneurs, right? So one of the things I would kind of caution is, right in 2005, I was comfortable that, hey, this is going to kind of take on. And then back then in America, we actually had what is called as, we had a housing boom back then.
Okay.
So now I had bought a house in 2002. I had bought a house. And so what I did was, the houses had actually risen up in value significantly. So I used what is called as like a HELOC loan, home equity line of credit loan.
Got it.
Right. Took a loan on the house. I got another $200,000. So a lot of cash back then, and wanted to kind of expand even faster. So that is something that we can caution people, right? Because you want
to. So basically, you put everything on the line. You put your
everything
house on the line.
Right.
So that is the degree of risk taking which you are comfortable
right.
with. Most entrepreneurs are comfortable with.
Correct. But I think my caution would be like, again, I mean, I guess even when you kind of feel that this is working out, at that point of time, you need to be more cautious.
Correct.
And I think, when you feel, oh my God, this is not going to work out, that's when you need to kind of really be resilient and say, look, this is going to work out. But when things are really working out, go back maybe a little bit more cautious at the time. How much are they working out?
Correct.
Will this work out like long term, right? What else can it actually happen? Because I think like things kind of go bad when you are complacent in some ways. Some ways, that's kind of what I feel, right? So back then again, one of the first mistakes I made was I found out, one of my from someone that this is, again, I'm not going to name the company. One of the largest life sciences company was going to kind of come to India and China to look at like custom synthesis of compounds.
Okay.
Completely different business. I had like no background, and then the next week I went back to my college and I met this professor who was from IIT Bombay in chemical engineering. He was a professor there, and somehow I kind of put this 2 + 2 together, and I said, hey, what if I actually started a new venture, like a chemical venture, and then my connections, they'll kind of come there, listen to what we have. We have a tie-up with IIT Bombay, and then perhaps we can kind of start off this business. Oh yeah, I can start technology IT business. I can start a custom synthesis business. I can do that. Why not? Because I have not experienced a lot of failures, right? So you don't know what you don't know at this point of time, right? And this is what I would kind of caution people, because it's important, especially early on in the business. It's very tempting to do like multiple things. I would say, stick with the core early on till it really kind of gets traction.
Got you. Yeah, makes sense, obviously. Right. Otherwise, you're sort of spreading yourself too thin in multiple directions.
You don't have resources. And so but what I did was I actually, I didn't know that. So I went in and actually basically went to IIT Bombay. First of all, I went to the company and said, hey, listen, I'm planning on tying up with IIT Bombay. Would you be interested in kind of coming and actually looking at a presentation? I said, yeah, sure. Because IIT Bombay had a really good brand. And it's all about having very smart people develop these custom compounds and molecules, basically. And so they said yes. So I went to IIT Bombay. We had an agreement, and then actually we had a lab space there. So I invested some money, and then we hired a bunch of people quickly. And then the client came in there. They listened to the presentation. They said, like, listen, you guys are very dynamic and we are very excited, but we want to kind of see you have at least 2 other customers.
Okay, that was a precondition.
Right. If you have 2 customers, then sure, we'll kind of give you business. And so I said, yeah, no problem. So then I went back to the US and I kind of hired a salesperson in the US. But then the more I got into the business, the more I realized, oh my God, so little I know about this business. I did not even know the difference between chemistry versus chemical engineering.
Oh, got it.
Right? So the professor who I knew, like one of the main person who was sort of like working on the venture, was a chemical engineering professor. He was not necessarily a chemistry professor. I did not even know that basic difference there. But so eventually, 6 months later, I had to close it out because we were not successful at all. Which in retrospect, because I kind of go back and talk to that contact I spoke to him about like 6-7 years back on, hey, if we had taken that business, would it have been a great business? They said like no, because a lot of people actually did that business, and eventually they had to kind of close down because there was too much capacity, right? So sometimes things actually happen for your own good. But going back to this story, my lesson there was for a business to be successful, there had to be a couple of different ingredients. I mean, unlimited, but a couple of clearly a couple of ingredients. One is I think it would be really be helpful if you had like know-how.
Okay, so first was know-how.
Know-how. This is my theory on this stuff, or my hypothesis. Know-how. I should have known what chemistry basically is. What are the intricacies on that? Or I should have educated myself about that. Even though if I didn't have a degree, I could have educated myself. The second thing would be probably having a lot of money. Right? That would kind of give you time. That would kind of give you time to kind of bring in people, and that's kind of what you see sometimes. You see in the Indian business landscape as well. I'm not going to kind of name names, but you have like very large conglomerates who may not really know that business, but if they have enough money, the idea is you can actually kind of buy your way into it and actually
build it. Yeah.
So money, capital would have been really, really helpful. And the third thing was connections. Connections wouldn't hurt. Would have been really, really helpful connections, because you want to have your first clients and you want to build stuff. So connections, either regulatory connections client connections or supplier connections. Connections are tremendously important, right? So all I had was a small sliver of connection, right? I did not have a lot of money, because Embrizol was just kind of taking off, and also, I did not have the know-how, right? So that is something foundationally I'd always kind of kept in mind,
So in hindsight, that experiment was
Yeah.
was failed, but it was also a good learning lesson that not to sort of spread yourself too thin,
Right.
stick to the core,
Right.
and try to make it big, and then move
Absolutely.
on from there.
Right. Stick to the core, and anything else you do, you need to really take time to really learn that stuff. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah.
So, in your journey of Embrizol over the last 20 years,
Yes.
any specific challenges that you faced? Okay, now either it could be existential challenge,
Yes.
due to regulatory changes, due to technological changes, due to COVID, something like COVID which hit us.
Right.
What are the challenges that you faced in a 20-year journey,
Right.
and some lessons from there?
Right. So I think there are a couple of them were I think at least one of them was an existential challenge. One of them. But the other ones were, two kinds of challenges. One is, I think, as you said, the existential challenge. Other challenges are actually kind of scale-up challenges.
Okay.
So both of them, I'm going to kind of touch base on both of them. So existential challenge, I think there is a very good example. So this is again going back to, so I finished off the embryonal synthesis, but the core business is kind of doing really well. So we continued to grow and prosper. And I want to kind of build new divisions, around healthcare. So, because healthcare is a big market space. So I think I had actually one gentleman who was working with me as a consultant, as an advisor for his consultant. So I told him, let's kind of build something, let's kind of build something in healthcare. Why don't we recruit some people? So he brought in some of his connections, but unfortunately he brought these connections basically from a company that he was advising as well.
Okay.
And so now I spoke to my attorney, and my attorney said, hey, listen, you got to be really, really careful, because these people may have some non-compete agreements, and you could kind of get into trouble. And, and then sure enough, and so we were actually kind of building a product, not something that they were building, but, something probably in that space. And so the other company found out, and then they filed a lawsuit. Now, obviously this is the US. US obviously is a very litigious society. Yeah. So they filed a lawsuit, and it took us almost about 9 months to resolve. But then again, in terms of the resolution, this is the irony of it, especially for the folks who are, if you're entrepreneurs of your podcast who are going to operate in the market, in the US market. I mean, an example here was eventually we had to kind of settle it down for about, I believe, around $600,000.
Okay.
So the way that actually kind of worked was we had to kind of pay the legal fees, and we had to pay a $50,000 fee basically for the company that we actually kind of recruited people from.
Okay.
Which is very small, but the rest of it, we had to kind of pay our attorney law firms. We had to kind of pay them $300,000, and then that company's law firm $250,000.
So basically, the bulk of the money went to the lawyer. 99% went to the lawyers.
Right. Exactly. So you got to be really careful, and I think we kind of got lucky. I got a lucky break there too, because the owner of the other company was very upset. I mean, I should have kind of known better. He got very upset, and in a fit of anger, what he did was he actually created a couple of we had embrizol.com, and he kind of created a couple of other websites, embrizol.net, and a couple of other
so you tried to spoof the brand
he was
name.
trying to, right, because he was so upset about it.
Okay.
And
so you put all the possible domain.
He tried to kind of get it in. And so what happened was we basically this is about 6 months into the lawsuit, and one day I suddenly realized, he's kind of gotten a bunch of these websites. So then I studied a little bit, and which is technically, because Embrizol doesn't matter what it is, but it is our copyright.
Correct.
Right. So I went back to our lawyer and say, hey, can we not kind of file a countersuit that this person actually, right? So they filed we filed a countersuit,
okay,
which resulted in him wanting to kind of come back and settle things down.
So that's what got him to the negotiating table.
That's right. We got lucky there.
Lucky there.
Lucky there. So, otherwise, there would have been existential, because it was not even money for him. It was actually, he was very upset about it, right? Which understandably so, right?
Correct.
So that was, I think, a big lesson I kind of learned. And despite the fact that my lawyers had told me, hey, listen, but this is again kind of going back to, because I've grown up in India, in India generally our idea, so let's deal with it later,
exactly.
In some ways, right? Dekha jayega. The Bombay spirit,
Correct.
Right? Correct, right? So kind of going back again, in the sense that, because it's like Bombay, kind of growing up in Bombay, not growing up, but 3 years in Bombay, got me that that can-do spirit.
Can-do spirit.
But I mean, that can kind of get you into trouble from a legal perspective in the US basically, or other countries like that. So that's a really we sorted it or solved it. But I think the other example.
Can you name this company with the one which was filed countersuit against you?
What's that?
What is the name of the company?
No, I can't. I
All right,
don't
okay.
really disclose that. They were not a super big company.
Okay.
But they were a much larger company than Result. So generally, also what happens is when these lawsuits, it's also like an attrition of money. I mean, as in who is willing to kind of spend the most amount of money there too. That's another thing too. So that's another thing I think, like for your entrepreneurs, especially if they are going to be doing things in the US, I would actually.
Yeah, you've got to check all the legal boundaries.
Look at a risk. This was clear because my lawyer clearly, right in the beginning, he told me, hey, listen, you could actually kind of run into a problem set. Now, I could have kind of solved some of those problems which eventually we did. When we were hiring these people, I could have kind of gotten them because now I did not know that they had a non-compete agreement. But I could have either asked them to kind of go back and indemnify us. I could have done that.
Maybe stronger due diligence.
Precisely. Thought more. Maybe could I kind of got a second opinion and all of that stuff. But anyway, like again, I have no regrets at all.
It's part of the learning curve.
Precisely. Builds your resilience, right? So the other constraint. Now you mentioned about constraint. This is on the constraint topic, right? Were actually these growth constraints. So what happens? I think initially, I eventually at some point I kind of realized. A company kind of goes through these milestones. And I was kind of researching back then. The milestones could be like one is like your first client / project, first client and project. Maybe then eventually maybe like multiple projects with the client.
Multiple projects, right? Revenue, employee count.
Right, precisely. Then
awards, recognition, all of those.
Right. And then the big thing for me too was again leadership constraints too, right? Because I think a lot of entrepreneurs, if they want to kind of scale up at some point. It's also kind of hard for them to let go and actually kind of bring in new leaders to be able to kind of take on certain functions. Because by nature, entrepreneurs are they're hardworking, they're smart. Sometimes they actually think, no one else can kind of do a great job as I can do. So it becomes a little harder. It's like stylistically, it's like my style. That becomes like much harder in some ways. So I think that's again a constraint too. So I think for me, going back to the one constraint was, can I kind of move away from actually doing work to more like doing thinking, not doing the actual work. So that was a big, sort of like a transitionary point.
Got it.
So that actually happened. That was a big thing. And the other thing I think was basically, can the company...
So sometimes it's also difficult to find employees who are entrepreneurial in nature.
Correct.
Because sometimes the entrepreneur or the founder is a risk taker, is a guy who sees a big picture.
Absolutely.
Now, those are the characteristics or the traits that has made him successful.
Right.
Now, when in your case, when you're trying to sort of now move on to a different role,
right,
it's very difficult to replace that role with somebody else.
Right. It is. But I think as a leader, as an entrepreneur, I think that's a big thing. Right. It's a big thing in terms of being able to mentor people, being able to identify people, because ultimately, like, we all have flaws. I mean, I don't know whether you should say flaws or not. We all have character attributes, right? We all have character attributes. So I think the key thing is to, eventually I think, like, you've been doing this for a long time. You kind of start kind of looking at it and saying, hey, listen, these are some pieces in this person that makes this person be less effective in doing the job.
Got it.
Right? So you start identifying that and actually kind of try to kind of get them to open about that.
Exactly.
So I think, again, of course, some people, if they're very risk averse, it's going to be hard for them to be an entrepreneur. By nature, they're not going to be. But I think for the most part, I would say about 30-40% of people, they're in that, you have that's a good number of people. And you just need to probably kind of go in there, spend time, identify that, inspire them. That's the hard part. It's not easy. It's clearly not easy.
Absolutely. So, Shekhar, moving on to the next question that I have is, you are an aviator and a marathoner.
Yes.
Now, let's take with the marathon part.
Okay.
Now, what lessons from running a marathon are applicable in business?
In terms of like, how does it relate to business? So obviously, one is the endurance, for you to take on something long term. Because for marathon, I think if you want to start running a marathon, it will almost take you a year or 2 years to really kind of get to a marathon level.
Correct.
So businesses like that, it's just long-term planning, resilience, which is, failures. In marathon, it will be injuries. You still have to, I guess, like, recover from injuries and kind of keep kind of going. So also, I think in some ways in marathon there is a concept called risk versus reward.
Okay.
What happens is after a couple of months, once you start running, you have like more energy and you tend to sort of like like overrun, and that kind of causes injury. So that's the thing, the concept, just like in business.
So the risk management is
there's a risk management there. Is it risk versus reward? Is it worth it? And the other thing too, I guess in marathon, the other big aspect in terms of how it sort of like relates to businesses. Business is actually it is a high energy activity. Especially in business, you have to inspire people. You have to do multiple things. You generally work long hours. Now you don't notice it because you're very passionate, but you would need to really have good physical strength.
Absolutely.
And also, without you knowing, or even with you knowing, it's a stressful situation. And as you know, stress is not really great for health.
Correct. Right? Absolutely.
So if you kind of take up running, even if it is not a marathon, just kind of take up running. Running is a great activity to kind of kickstart endorphins in your brain. A great activity for you to kind of bring down stress. It's great on your health, and it kind of gives you that ability to kind of do things.
Got it. So Shikhar, you also an aviator. I was reading your profile. You're an aviator and you're a licensed pilot.
Yes.
How did this hobby, should I say, or should a passion, I don't know what is the right word to use, hobby or passion, how did it come about?
Yes.
And fundamentally, aviation or flying is a risky affair.
Yes.
So do you naturally gravitate towards risky projects in life?
Right.
Is that part of personality?
No.
Where there is risk, there is Shikhar over there?
Right. No, that's a very fair question. That's a fair, in some ways, I think it's a fair point there, right? But I think, in some ways it kind of started off in a very plain way because we were in the middle of the pandemic. This is about like 2 years back. And obviously, as you know, during the pandemic, people were forced to take on new activities. Otherwise, otherwise you're like cooped up in the house, and it's not good for relationships. And so my wife suggested, rather than you being here inside in here being miserable, why don't you take on something new? And I wanted to be an astronaut as a kid, because a lot of people actually want to be a pilot as a kid. But for some reason, I want to be an astronaut as a kid. But when being an astronaut is something that's it's a rarity. It doesn't happen.
Got it.
Right? And I took on flying, and obviously it's a pretty serious activity. Needs a lot of commitment, not just in terms of learning how to kind of fly, but you have to kind of really pass a series of exams basically.
Oh yeah.
Right. So you do your the basic thing is a private pilot license PPL, and you kind of get experience. And then you kind of do like what is called as instrument rating. So again, you have to kind of give exams for that. You have to kind of pass both the.
There's a lot of effort that goes into it.
Tremendous amount of effort.
Now, as a CEO of a leading company, where do you find the time to balance all these things? How do you manage what is your secret of time management?
I think that's kind of when you trust other people, right? You trust other people. Now, one thing about flying is it's very therapeutic.
Okay.
Because most of the time you're kind of flying by yourself, and as a CEO, and again at different phases of the company. So the phase I am in right now, a lot of like my time should be spent on thinking, strategizing. So you are flying in your plane, and that kind of gives you a lot of time to think and strategize in some ways.
All right. Okay.
Right? So now the other thing I think flying. So again, private pilot license, instrument license. I also kind of got a commercial license, and eventually I kind of got my jet type rating. I got it. Right?
The whole
shebang, right?
Whole shebang, okay.
Right. But I think sometimes I kind of think about, hey, how did it actually going to help me in my business? So there are some direct help, and then there are like some indirect help. For example, I've always been much more of an ad hoc type of a person.
Okay.
Off the cuff, do things. Now flying is not like that. Flying is a very procedural activity. So let's say you're going to kind of fly. You have to kind of think ahead and say, hey, where am I going to kind of fly? What's the weather like over there? What are the runways like? What are actually we can call it as like the instrument approaches there. If the weather is bad, what are they going to be doing? If it's going to be next 2 days, I'm going to come back. I have to look at like how is the weather predicted for the next 2 days? How much fuel would I need? So there is a lot of like planning that kind of goes on. And also flying is all about like checklists. So before you start your plane, you kind of run through a series of checklists and say, check, done, check, check, check. which is kind of not how I normally operate
So
as an
this is
entrepreneur.
not in your nature.
It's not in my nature, but it's a good attribute to have, because not everything should be like agile and ad hoc, right? There is always a benefit in actually having some planning.
Basically, you are more adaptable to new things,
Right.
to learn and adapt yourself to new things, new conditions.
Right.
So that's also a good skill to
It's
have as
a
an
good skill
entrepreneur.
set. Right? Absolutely, that flying actually sort of like we talk about human mind plasticity, right? We talk about like neurons kind of reconnecting when you do new activities, whether it is like learning how to play piano, which I'm kind of doing right now, by the way.
Okay.
Right? Which is an amazing thing. You learn new things. Flying is like that in some ways. It actually kind of helps you sort of like rewire your brain and kind of gets you to look at things differently. But also, I'm talking about the procedural aspect that you can learn in flying, because flying you cannot kind of be ad hoc. You have to kind of be like procedural. So I can actually apply some of those principles in my work too. So rather than kind of going and actually saying like, look, everything is ad hoc, I could actually have some procedures, because we don't have to kind of constantly reinvent the wheel.
Got it.
Right?
Makes sense.
So some ways I think that's kind of really great. And the second thing I think flying is also helpful from a client perspective, because we have many clients. My primary house is in Connecticut, and it's kind of really hard to go to these clients, because especially post-COVID, a lot of clients, they are people who work for these large client companies. They may be in different locations. So nothing.
So
like
do you
being
actually
able to-
fly out to
I
client
do,
locations?
I do.
Are you serious?
Right.
That
I mean,
is the first time I've heard somebody actually flying down to. Usually people drive down,
Right.
or they fly commercial airlines.
Correct,
But
correct.
very rare to hear somebody actually flying a plane and meeting a client.
But look at it. It actually does open up your world for them.
Oh yeah, of course.
You can actually kind of meet a lot more folks, and it's kind of convenient. And especially like given that a lot of our clients are in the US, it's actually really hard to basically you can't. I mean, of course you can drive down, but there's heavy traffic. You're talking about like a whole day. In some ways, flying is
Yeah,
really.
absolutely love the idea, Shekhar. It is very unique.
Right.
Huh?
Yeah. And clients are excited too, because when they kind of find out, that the CEO of the company has kind of flown themselves to kind of come and meet you, it kind of shows them that, hey, these people are kind of committed.
Absolutely.
They kind of value my opinion, my, feedback.
All of those things.
So, I mean, I'm not doing it for that sake. I'm genuinely
But
kind of,
it's a
going out
byproduct
there.
of your
Right.
flying.
Correct. Right.
Understood.
Yes.
Wonderful. So
Yes.
that's how you sort of leverage all your new passions, and it sort of trickles down into your daily activities.
Right.
Somewhere it trickles down.
In some way, it kind of goes back to, I guess, kind of goes back. I can't even say it properly, but it's like karmane vadikara semaphaleshu. It kind of goes back to, that whole Sanskrit sloka around, don't really be fixated about the outcome, right? Do your job, and outcome kind of happens.
Just leave
right?
it.
Leave
to
it
the
happens, right?
universe for the
universe. Outcome happens. So in some ways, again, I clearly had to kind of say that it's not that I'm actually got in the plane and kind of fly the clients to impress them. It's just that genuinely, I want to kind of meet with them and kind of get to kind of hear what is kind of going on,
Got it.
because insights, and we see that people are really happy.
Shikhar, let's touch upon some other aspects.
Yeah.
You've had a successful career, built a successful business across the US, India. How important is wealth to you? How important is wealth to you? And the role of wealth in your life?
Sure. I think.
Do you remember the first time you had $1 million with you? What was that feeling?
Right. There is always, I think, look, I think there are certain milestones in our life, right? But I think kind of going back to, I think honestly, you don't necessarily need a lot of wealth to be happy. Necessarily.
Well, that is after you achieve wealth, right? When everybody has a continuum to sort of move. The journey is a continuum. So
Right.
in the initial phase when
Right.
it happens,
Right.
how is that feeling? And versus now that you move further down the continuum,
Right.
what do you feel about wealth creation?
I mean, look, there's no doubt what he said. Right? Like, because I went to America, I barely had any money. Eventually I kind of got a scholarship there. But the first year, I still remember, going from my college, going to, I know you studied that at Clark too, and Delaware is not that far. And, going and doing like the groceries there in my bicycle in the winter, because I did not even actually own a car.
Okay.
So sometimes I reflect back on, hey, look, I did not have a car when I first kind of came in, and today here I am actually flying in my own jet, right? So clearly, you kind of feel a sense of gratefulness there, right? And going back to milestones, look, my milestones clearly are important, right? Because we kind of go back and we reflect on them. I still remember the first time my job was $100,000 salary a year, That's a big thing. That's
Big
like,
thing,
I
yeah.
can't kind of believe, like, I kind of get that, right?
Correct.
That's a big accomplishment. So clearly, I think, I mean, like, let's say even from a company's perspective, I think the revenue numbers, when we kind of hit certain numbers, basically, revenue numbers, or when we kind of hit certain milestones in number of people, when we kind of hit like our first 100 employees, or when we kind of hit like our first, 500 employees, or like 1,000 people. So these are big milestones. I think, entrepreneurs in some ways are sort of like goal driven. I don't think they kind of care so much truly in terms of, hey, this goal translates to this. But I think, like
So sometimes
marathon.
it's good to reflect back, like you're saying, you reflect back and say, listen, this journey has been interesting journey.
Correct. Like marathon, right? Marathon is 26.2 miles. So if you just did 26 miles, which is you're almost done a marathon, and you stop right there, you're not going to kind of feel happy, right?
Correct.
So I think it's like that in business too, because I think by nature, I think business people they're like driven, and they want to kind of get to some certain point, and having those goals and hitting those milestones give them tremendous happiness and satisfaction for sure.
Got it. Now let's touch base upon your latest venture, Checkout, which is very unique thing that you're doing in the Indian banking space, trying to sort of aggregate all the banks together under a unifying platform and offer them services. Could be a SaaS-based type service for loyalty management, for the account management, and a bunch of things. How did you sort of hit upon that idea? And I mean, I'm sure it's a very difficult challenge to tie up with each nationalized bank in India.
Right. Absolutely. I think, like, again, when we first started, I'd kind of give the credit to the CEO of Checkout, Sudhi, who basically, decided to kind of launch this venture, and I have supported him from day one. But I think if we go back and look at it, I think, from an evolution of, let's kind of go back further back around the whole thing around, the digital media space. So I don't know if you read an article, Wall Street Journal actually kind of came up with an article basically that whole space, in terms of the digital marketing or, ad space has just kind of crossed $1 trillion a year.
Correct.
Right. So that's a tremendous amount of, it's a big industry. And the great thing is it still continues to grow. It's kind of growing double digit every year.
Absolutely.
And especially in a place like India, it's probably kind of growing maybe 25 to 40%, something like that.
25-30% average.
Right. And pretty big numbers basically, right? So kind of going back again here is, if you again kind of go back and look at some of the biggest companies in the US, right? So you look at now, of course, if you take like Apple, if you take Tesla, if you take these two companies, Nvidia out, the rest of them, like Google or like even Meta, all of these companies, they're still in some ways actually an ad business in some ways at the core.
At the core, yes.
At the core,
that is where the revenue comes from.
That's where it kind of comes from, absolutely, right? Even like somebody like Uber today, right? Uber actually, though they are in the the auto aggregation business, they're actually starting to figure out how to kind of monetize this stuff. When we are actually kind of waiting for I guess like for our lift, we kind of see basically an ad kind of come in and actually this stuff. So I think clearly, I guess like I was kind of fascinated by this business, and this is something that we kind of felt would kind of really kind of grow tremendously in India. Now, India obviously it's a slightly different ecosystem. You have many different players, but we did not necessarily see a lot of big players basically working with the nationalized banks. And I can sometimes think they're fortuitous, because when we kind of started off, again, the banking was kind of going through some ways sort of like a revolution. So you had, pretty much a more saturation in the tier one markets, urban centers. I think there were multiple means to reach to people, through digital ads. But let's say your tier 2, tier 3 cities was much harder.
I think also importantly, the tailwind was
Yes.
the digitization of the entire banking industry as a whole.
Absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
all the banks had realized that
Right.
they need to sort of
Right.
be digital first
Right.
in order to maintain the market share, customer
Right.
satisfaction, and all those metrics.
Right. Precisely. So that's again, foundational change, because probably 6-7 years back, banks were like, how many deposits did I kind of get? How much loans did I give? It's very simple numbers. Now that whole space has changed so much, right? So, and I think we were fortunate that we kind of got into some of the big banks early on, and we have built a really good platform, and eventually at some point we'll leverage the power of AI Because ultimately it's about surfacing the right ad, the most appropriate ad basically for the right consumer.
Absolutely.
And that's kind of really at the core what we are at Checkout.
God.
Yeah, and then we're hoping we can make greater progress here, and eventually, hopefully, we can actually launch it globally across.
Oh yeah.
Yes.
So the same model can be
Same model,
replicated across
right.
the world.
Precisely. We can build partnerships there. We can build, obviously, you have your agencies, you have banks, and you have customers. So hopefully we can actually build those partnerships, and we could replicate it other places.
Got it. Wonderful. So as we wrap it up, a few questions we'll
Please.
I'll ask you.
Yes.
Is what is the role of luck in success, or role of luck in life? What is your general theory around that?
So I have read other people too. I think Elon Musk, somebody who's like very, very rational person. I mean, hopefully most people think he's rational, because a lot of people also think he's very irrational, right? He's very controversial these days. But I mean, I think I've heard many people kind of say, I mean, there is an element of luck in business, but then also it's a mindset. I think, I mean, I've always kind of believed that I'm lucky. So I think sometimes when you believe something, it actually happens. If you believe you're unlucky, right? Maybe you should not do business, right? Because business does need a lot of luck. When we mean luck,
I mean,
things need
luck
to
in
go.
business, in
Yes.
general,
Life,
right?
right? What facet does luck not need in? Every single facet, right? But I think going back to a lot of thinkers and speakers of business, I have heard, yeah, it's nice to be lucky, right? But I think perhaps it's a mindset. Maybe perhaps the whole thinking that I'm lucky might be an extension of your mindset around, being grateful, right? So because I think there are some people, if something actually happens, let's say they kind of got hit by a car accident and lost, maybe they fractured one leg. Perhaps they may actually think, oh my God, I'm really lucky, I did not fracture both legs.
So it's a perspective.
Perhaps.
So even putting the not so pleasant things in life in perspective. Correct. And saying, listen, this could have been far worse. But it is less.
Right. I think it's gratefulness. Because, resilience, gratefulness, perhaps both, right? Because, when we talk about resilience, you can rise from your failure. What does it really mean? I think it's your mindset basically on, I mean, I don't know how to rise from failure. Could it be, I think you look at it and say, oh, it could have been worse, perhaps. Maybe that'll actually help you get up basically and do stuff.
Shekhar, have you fired any employee?
I mean, and not necessarily directly fire, right? Because I'm a very people person.
Yeah, but let's say, example, somebody has a performance issue.
Right.
And then, at some point,
right.
Every organization has a tolerance limit.
Right.
How do you deal with such situations? Unpleasant ones.
Sure.
It could be firing, it could be something else.
Right.
But generally, what is your approach towards
ultimately, we live in a situation wherein, it's actually, I guess we call it as at-will employment, right? That basically means that the employee can leave at any time with an appropriate notice period, and the same thing with an employer. Now, of course, we have the India operations, or we have Australia operations. The laws are different here, and we have US operations. And in the US,
but that is the legal framework.
Sure.
But then, because you are a people's person that I've come to know.
Yes.
How do you convey the bad news?
Right. Look, you have to make tough calls, clearly, right? You have to make tough calls. But despite being in business for 20 years, Gaurav, I had to still, basically say that if I had to, even if I don't give that news to that person, of course I had to make decisions. When I make those decisions, they make me really, really miserably. Those decisions, I don't take them lightly at all. It'll probably, because whatever you're doing, your actions is going to impact somebody, right? And I know that for sure. I mean, can I actually, at some point, you cannot continue on. That this is not going to work out, and so it's best basically to, as a businessman, as an entrepreneur, or as a leader, to acknowledge that and basically come back and say, perhaps this is not working out for the other person as well, to move on. But the reality is, that it is going to impact that person.
Absolutely.
Right.
As a business leader, what do you lose sleep upon?
I think it's a rapidly changing world. But again, when I go back and look at where we are, so I think if I was an executive of a very large company, let's say a company of 500,000 people, I think I would lose sleep more at this point of time, because I have a gigantic company. It's hard to be nimble. It's hard to move around. Right? It's much, much harder. I think I lost sleep about this, I would say maybe 6 or 7 years back, because initially, probably back in 2018, that's when we first heard about AI, machine learning and all of those things. That's kind of when I really, because by the time MResult was already a 13-year-old company, and there were certain parts of MResult that I was worried that we were being atrophied. We were looking more like a government company.
Okay.
And that's kind of when I really went into this whole drive around making the company dynamic and sort of like changing the company culture. So now today, at least in my head, the space that we are in is we are in the AI space, we are in digital space, we are in data space. It's a great space. We work with a number of large companies. We're a very nimble player. So I don't lose sleep as much now. Of course, I do still lose sleep in terms of what are the new things that's kind of going on, more from excitement than probably from fear.
Got it. And Shekhar, what do you think your legacy should be?
I guess that's I truly, Gautam, I'm really kind of saying this stuff. I'm not trying to be a smart aleck here. I truly, really, really enjoy whatever I'm doing.
Okay.
Purely. Even if tomorrow there is no, let's say, creation of wealth, I would still kind of do it because, what else would I do? There's only so much flying I can do. There's only, two of my new activities, I'm learning how to kind of play piano again.
Okay.
I had learned how to play piano about 10 years back when my kids were a little younger, and then I stopped it. But now I'm kind of, retaking that. And I'm actually now a certified PADI open water diver. That's a new one that I did.
Okay.
And but there's only so much hobbies you can take on. You got to have something that's kind of core. I'm extraordinarily fortunate that that I love what I do. Doing business, creating value, making people happy, making customers happy. So I'm not really thinking. I really mean it. I'm not thinking about legacy at all.
Okay.
This is a good gig I have.
Okay.
Keep going.
Just keep going.
Yes.
Like Johnny Walker says, keep walking.
Right. Precisely. Right.
All right, Shekhar, thank you so much for being on the show. Wonderful talking to you. Great, thanks.
Gautam, pleasure. Thank you for having me.
All right, thank you.
Thanks.